The Etruscans, masters of ancient Italy. Before Rome became an empire, before Caesar crossed the Rubicon, there was another civilization that dominated the Italian peninsula. The Etruscans. Between 900 and 100 BCE, they built sophisticated cities, created stunning art, and developed technologies that Romans would later claim as their own. But here's the mystery. We still can't fully understand their language. They weren't native Italians, possibly arriving from Lydia in modern Turkey, or perhaps emerging from a blend of migrants and locals. Their women enjoyed freedoms unheard of in Greece or Rome. They predicted the future by examining animal livers. They built Rome's sewers, taught Romans their alphabet, and then vanished into history. Who were these enigmatic people? Let's uncover their entire story. The Etruscan story begins around 900 BCE in what's now Tuscany, a region named after them. But they didn't appear out of nowhere. The Greek historian Herodotus claimed they sailed from Lydia in Asia Minor, fleeing a famine. Modern DNA evidence suggests he might have been partially right, showing genetic links to the Eastern Mediterranean. But they also mixed extensively with local Italian populations, making their origins a fascinating puzzle. Before becoming Etruscans, these people were part of the Villanova culture, an Iron Age society that cremated their dead and placed ashes in distinctive biconical urns. Then something changed. Around 720 BCE, there's a sudden explosion in sophistication. Elaborate tombs appear, metalworking becomes masterful, trade networks expand dramatically. The Villanovans were transforming into Etruscans. Unlike Rome, which became a unified empire, Etruscan civilization was a loose confederation of independent city-states. 12 major cities formed the Etruscan League: Veii, Tarquinia, Cerveteri, Volci, Vetulonia, and others. Each had its own king or magistrate, its own army, its own identity. They'd cooperate for religious festivals and occasionally for warfare, but they never unified politically. This lack of unity would eventually prove fatal when facing Rome's disciplined expansion. Their location was perfect. Tuscany had everything: fertile soil for agriculture, forests for timber, and most importantly, rich metal deposits. Iron ore from Elba, copper from the Colline Metallifere, silver and lead from various mines. Control these resources, and you control Mediterranean trade. The Etruscans understood this completely. Their society was rigidly hierarchical. At the top sat the Lucumones, the aristocratic class who owned vast estates and controlled political power. Below them were free citizens, artisans, and merchants. Then came the laity, servants or dependents tied to aristocratic households. At the bottom, slaves captured in war or through trade. This system would persist throughout Etruscan history. The Etruscans didn't just mine metal, they mastered it. Their smiths produced some of the finest ironwork in the ancient world. Agricultural tools that made farming more efficient. Weapons that made their warriors formidable. Decorative items so beautiful that Greeks and Phoenicians eagerly traded for them. Etruscan workshops became legendary across the Mediterranean. But metalworking was just the beginning. They dominated the Tyrrhenian Sea, the waters between Italy and Sardinia, Corsica, and Sicily. Etruscan merchant ships loaded with iron ingots, bronze goods, wine, olive oil, and their distinctive black pottery called bucero sailed to every major port. In return came Greek ceramics, Egyptian luxuries, Spanish silver, and enslaved people from across the Mediterranean. This wasn't peaceful trade. The Etruscans were also pirates and warriors. They allied with Carthaginians against Greek colonists, fighting naval battles for control of trade routes. Around 540 BCE, Etruscans and Carthaginians defeated Greek forces at the Battle of Alalia off Corsica, securing Etruscan naval supremacy for decades. Mediterranean shipping routes meant Mediterranean wealth, and the Etruscans were getting rich. On land, They revolutionized agriculture. The Tuscan landscape back then was quite different, wetter and marshier. Etruscans built sophisticated drainage systems, channeling water into canals and underground tunnels. These cuniculi, as Romans later called them, transformed swampland into productive farmland. They grew grain, grapes for wine, and olives for oil. Their agricultural surplus fed growing cities and became another export commodity. Etruscan cities became manufacturing centers. Workshops produced not just metal goods, but fine ceramics, jewelry, furniture, and textiles. The famous Bucchero pottery, with its distinctive glossy black surface, was produced in such quantities that it's been found from Spain to the Black Sea. Each city specialized in certain crafts, creating an internal trade network that complemented their external commerce. This economic power translated into cultural sophistication. Wealthy Etruscans lived in spacious homes, wore elaborate clothing, commissioned stunning artwork, and hosted lavish banquets. Their prosperity lasted for centuries, funding everything from massive tomb construction to importing the finest Greek artists to decorate their cities. Walk through any Etruscan site today, and you'll see their engineering genius. They were master builders, though their materials were quite different from later Roman stone architecture. Etruscan temples used wood for columns and framework, terracotta for roof tiles and decorations, and mud brick for walls. The wooden elements have long since rotted away, which is why we have so few standing Etruscan buildings compared to Greek temples. But what they lacked in permanence, they made up for in innovation. Etruscan temples sat on high stone platforms called podia, approached by frontal staircases. The roof extended far beyond the walls, creating deep porches, and those roofs were spectacular, decorated with life-sized terracotta sculptures of gods, mythical creatures, and geometric patterns. Imagine a temple roof crowned with a charging warrior or a fierce winged beast, all in vivid painted terracotta. Underground, they built for eternity. Etruscan necropolises, cities of the dead, were massive complexes carved into bedrock or built as tumuli, earth-covered mounds concealing chamber tombs. The Banditaccia necropolis at Cerveteri contains thousands of tombs, laid out like streets in a city. Some tombs were simple chambers, others were elaborate multi-room complexes mimicking actual houses, complete with carved stone furniture, false doors, and ceiling beams sculpted in rock. Inside these tombs, they painted frescoes that give us our most vivid glimpse into Etruscan life. The Tomb of the Leopards shows a banquet scene with reclining figures, musicians, and servants. The Tomb of the Augurs depicts athletic contests and religious ceremonies. The colors, astonishingly well preserved in some cases, show reds, blues, yellows, and greens that must have made these underground chambers glow in lamplight. The Etruscans invented, or at least perfected, the true arch. While other civilizations stacked stones in corbelled arches, Etruscans used the voussoir arch with a central keystone, creating much stronger structures. They built arched city gates, bridges, and drainage tunnels. When Romans later built their famous aqueducts and amphitheatres, they were using Etruscan engineering principles. Their greatest engineering project might be Rome's Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer that drained the marshy valley between Rome's hills, allowing the Roman Forum to be built. Started by Etruscan kings ruling Rome in the 6th century BCE, it's still functioning today, 26 centuries later. That's engineering. Etruscan art tells us who they wanted to be. Walk into any major museum with an Etruscan collection and you'll see their aesthetic immediately. It's dynamic, expressive, often joyful. Human figures smile, dance, embrace. Even their funerary art emphasizes life and celebration rather than death and mourning. Bucchero pottery defined early Etruscan material culture. This distinctive black ceramic, achieved through a reducing atmosphere in the kiln, had a glossy surface that mimicked more expensive metal vessels. Early Bucaro was thin-walled and elegant. Later production became heavier, with elaborate relief decoration. For centuries, Bucaro was the prestige pottery of central Italy, exported widely and frequently imitated. But metalwork was where Etruscan craftsmen truly excelled. Gold jewelry from Etruscan tombs displays technical mastery that's hard to match even today. They perfected granulation, attaching tiny gold spheres in intricate patterns without visible solder. They created delicate filigree work, twisting fine gold wire into lace-like designs. Etruscan jewelry wasn't just worn, it announced wealth, status, and taste. Bronze sculpture reached remarkable heights. The Chimera of Arezzo, discovered in 1553, shows a wounded mythical creature, part lion, part goat, part serpent, its body tense with pain and fury. The Capitoline wolf, long symbol of Rome, might actually be Etruscan work, though scholars still debate this. These weren't stiff, archaic sculptures, but dynamic figures full of movement and emotion. Terracotta sculpture was equally impressive. The sarcophagus of the spouses from Cerveteri shows a married couple reclining together on a dining couch, smiling, the wife's hand gesturing as if in conversation. It's intimate, warm, and remarkably modern in feeling. These weren't meant to be idealized gods, but real people, captured in stone as they wanted to be remembered. Tomb paintings reveal daily life in vivid detail. Musicians play double flutes and lyres, dancers move in complex patterns, servants pour wine, athletes wrestle, race, and dive, hunters pursue game. One famous scene shows men and women dining together, reclining on couches in the Greek fashion, but with a crucial difference. Etruscan women fully participated in symposia, unlike secluded Greek wives. The Etruscans imported Greek pottery in massive quantities, but rather than just copying Greek style, they adapted it. Etruscan artists painted their own myths, their own athletic games, their own religious ceremonies on Greek-style vases. They were consumers of Mediterranean culture, but also creators of their own distinctive artistic tradition. Here's where Etruscans shocked the Greek and Roman worlds. Etruscan women had freedoms that seemed almost scandalous to their Mediterranean neighbors. Greek writers described Etruscan women with a mix of fascination and disapproval. They attended banquets alongside men, reclining on couches, drinking wine, and participating in conversation. In Athens, respectable women stayed in separate quarters. In Etruria, they were part of public life. Etruscan women had their own names, not just feminine versions of their father's or husband's names. Inscriptions record women as Tanaquil or Ramtha, identified individually, not merely as someone's daughter or wife. They could own property, they could commission art. They appeared in public at religious ceremonies, athletic games, and theatrical performances. This doesn't mean Etruria was a feminist paradise. It was still a patriarchal society with rigid class distinctions. But within the aristocratic class, women wielded significant social power. The story of Tanaquil, an Etruscan noblewoman who became Queen of Rome, illustrates this. According to Roman tradition, she was a shrewd political advisor who helped her husband, Tarquinius Priscus, seize the Roman throne and later engineered the succession of her son-in-law. Etruscan society was organized around powerful aristocratic families. These clans controlled vast estates, held political offices, and competed for prestige through elaborate displays of wealth. Banquets were crucial social and political events where alliances were forged, marriages arranged, and status displayed through the quality of food, wine, entertainment, and tableware. Below the aristocrats were free citizens, merchants, artisans, farmers who owned their own land. These people had rights and could accumulate wealth, though they were excluded from the highest political offices. Many worked in the workshops that produced Etruria's exports or managed the agricultural estates. The laity were dependents, tied to aristocratic households, but not quite slaves. They might be former slaves who'd been freed, or free people who'd fallen into debt and dependency. Their status was ambiguous, somewhere between free and enslaved. At the bottom were slaves, captured in warfare or purchased through trade. Slavery was fundamental to the Etruscan economy, as it was throughout the ancient Mediterranean. Slaves worked in mines, on agricultural estates, in workshops, and as household servants. Some slaves could accumulate money and eventually buy their freedom, though this was uncommon. Social mobility existed, but was limited. A successful merchant might gain wealth, but not aristocratic status. Aristocratic families guarded their privileges carefully, intermarrying to maintain bloodlines and political power. The tension between the established aristocracy and rising wealthy commoners would eventually weaken Etruscan cities from within. Etruscan religion was obsessive, intricate, and profoundly influential on Roman practice. The Etruscans believed the gods had revealed a complete religious system called the Etrusca Disciplina, recorded in sacred books that detailed every ritual, every omen, every proper procedure for communicating with the divine. Get the ritual wrong, and you'd anger the gods. Disaster would follow. Their pantheon resembled the Greek gods, but with significant differences. Tinia was their sky god, equivalent to Zeus, but more distant and more concerned with cosmic order than Greek Zeus's personal dramas. Uni, their great goddess, resembled Hera, but had distinct attributes. Menva was their wisdom goddess, similar to Athena. These deities and dozens more inhabited a structured cosmos where everything followed divine rules. What made Etruscan religion unique was their obsession with divination. They needed to know the god's will before taking any significant action. This wasn't optional, it was absolutely necessary for success. Two forms of divination dominated: haruspicy and augury. Haruspicy was the art of reading animal livers. When the Etruscans sacrificed an animal, usually a sheep, trained priests called haruspices examined the liver's shape, color, markings, and any abnormalities. They had bronze models of livers divided into sections, each section corresponding to a particular god. An irregularity in one section meant that god had a message. The famous Piacenza liver, a bronze model inscribed with divine names, shows how complex this system was. Augury involved observing natural phenomena, especially bird flight and lightning. The sky was divided into 16 sections, and the direction from which birds flew, or lightning struck, indicated which gods were speaking. Augurs would mark out a templum, a sacred space, and make observations from within it. These practices weren't superstition to the Etruscans, they were science, a systematic method for understanding divine communication. The Etruscans were deeply concerned with the afterlife. Death wasn't the end, but a transition to another existence. Proper burial rituals were essential. The dead needed provisions for their journey: food, wine, weapons, jewelry, everything that marked their status in life. Tombs were furnished like houses because the dead would inhabit them. But the afterlife wasn't necessarily pleasant. Etruscan tomb paintings showed demons. Charon with his hammer, Vanth with wings and torches, other frightening figures who guarded the passage to the underworld. The dead faced judgment, and not everyone's afterlife was the same. The good and pious might find peace, others might face torment. This funerary religion drove their famous tomb construction, building an eternal house for the dead, filling it with treasured possessions, painting scenes of happy banquets and games. This was how you ensured your afterlife would be comfortable. The relationship between Etruscans and Romans is one of history's great ironies. Rome, the city that would eventually conquer all of Italy and much of the known world, began as an Etruscan project. Traditional Roman history, as told by later Roman writers, describes a period when Etruscan kings ruled Rome. These weren't conquerors, but rather Etruscan aristocrats who gained power in what was then a minor Latin settlement. The Tarquin dynasty ruled Rome for roughly a century, from around 616 to 509 BCE. Tarquinius Priscus, or Tarquin the Elder, supposedly arrived in Rome with his Etruscan wife Tanaquil. Through ambition and Tanaquil's political cunning, he became king. Roman tradition credits him with building the Circus Maximus, Rome's great chariot racing stadium, and beginning construction of the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. His successor, Servius Tullius, reorganized Roman society, built the Servian Wall around the city, and conducted the first census. Whether he was ethnically Etruscan is debated, but he ruled in Etruscan fashion and continued Etruscan-style projects. Under these kings, Rome transformed from a collection of hilltop villages into a proper city with public buildings, temples, sewers, and organized government. The last king, Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud, was supposedly a tyrant whose son's rape of the noblewoman Lucretia sparked a rebellion. In 509 BCE, the Romans expelled the Tarquins and established the Republic. But here's the thing, they kept almost everything Etruscan. The Republican magistrates wore togas, sat on curial chairs, and were preceded by lictors carrying fasces, bundles of rods with an axe, all symbols inherited from Etruscan kings. Roman priests practiced divination using Etruscan methods. Roman triumphs, those elaborate victory parades, followed Etruscan religious ritual. Roman gladiatorial games likely originated in Etruscan funeral customs. The Romans adopted Etruscan engineering, Etruscan religious practices, Etruscan political symbols, and then spent centuries fighting Etruscan cities. Veii, just 10 miles from Rome, became Rome's greatest enemy. For nearly a century, Rome and Veii fought for control of the Tiber Valley. The war was brutal, exhausting both sides. Finally, in 396 BCE, after a 10-year siege comparable to the Trojan War, Rome captured and destroyed Veii. The Roman general Marcus Furius Camillus was celebrated as a second Romulus, but the victory came at enormous cost. This marked the beginning of the end for Etruscan independence. Veii had been one of the most powerful Etruscan cities. Its fall demonstrated that Rome was no longer a minor player, but a serious military threat. Other Etruscan cities watched nervously as Roman power grew. The 4th century BCE brought disaster from all sides. Celtic Gauls invaded from the north, crushing Etruscan colonies in the Po Valley and even sacking Rome itself in 390 BCE. Etruria lost its northern territories and vital trade routes. From the south, Rome expanded relentlessly with superior military organization. While Etruscan cities fought independently, pursuing their own interests, Roman armies were unified and disciplined. After Rome destroyed Veii in 396 BCE, other Etruscan cities fell, one by one. During the Samnite Wars, Etruscans joined desperate coalitions with Samnites, Umbrians, and Gauls against Rome, but coordination was poor. At Sentinum in 295 BCE, Rome crushed the coalition. Roman military supremacy was complete. Economically, Etruria choked. Rome now controlled the metal trade that had made Etruria wealthy. Roman colonies took the best farmland. Maritime commerce shifted to Roman ports. The economic foundation of Etruscan civilization crumbled. Most Etruscan cities became soci, Roman allies, required to provide troops but keeping limited autonomy. It was subjugation disguised as partnership. Cultural assimilation accelerated. Etruscan aristocrats adopted Roman names, spoke Latin, married Romans. The Etruscan language retreated, replaced by Latin in public life. The Social War of 91 to 88 BCE ended Etruscan independence. Italian allies rebelled, demanding full citizenship rather than subordinate status. After brutal fighting, Rome granted citizenship to all Italians. Etruscans became Romans legally and politically. The Etruscan language made its last stand in religious contexts. Haruspices continued practicing divination, and some aristocratic families preserved traditional knowledge. Emperor Claudius, in the 1st century CE, wrote a history of Etruria and tried reviving Etruscan learning, but by then, few could read Etruscan texts. The language was effectively extinct, surviving only in archaic religious formulas that fewer people understood each generation. The Etruscans vanished as a people, but their influence saturated Roman civilization. Romans openly acknowledged this debt, admitting Etruscans had civilized them, taught them urbanism, given them religious practices and political symbols. As Rome conquered the world, these Etruscan elements spread everywhere. Architecture showed profound influence. The Roman arch, vault, and dome built on Etruscan foundations. Roman aqueducts used arched arcades, an Etruscan innovation. Roman temples, sitting on high podia with deep porches, came directly from Etruscan models. City planning of Roman colonies reflected Etruscan principles. Roman religion was thoroughly Etruscanized. Taking auspices before important decisions, examining bird flight and lightning, came from Etruria. Haruspices remained important for centuries, their services required for state ceremonies. The Roman triumph, where generals dressed as Jupiter rode through Rome, followed Etruscan ritual patterns. Gladiatorial combat possibly originated in Etruscan funeral games honouring dead aristocrats. Chariot racing in permanent circuses was Etruscan. Roman theatre borrowed elaborate masks and staged performances from Etruscan traditions. The fasces, bundles of rods around an axe, became Rome's iconic authority symbol. Magistrates' lictors carried fasces, showing their power to punish. This was pure Etruscan. Mussolini later revived it for Italian fascism, connecting to Rome's glory without realizing it was actually Etruscan. Etruscan families integrated into Roman aristocracy. Some maintained traditions while becoming publicly Roman. By the late Republic, Etruscan ancestry was prestigious, claiming ancient nobility. The Etruscan language left traces in Latin. Religious terms and urban vocabulary show Etruscan borrowing. The Latin word histrio for actor comes from Etruscan. These linguistic fossils are all that remain of the once vibrant language. Roman realistic portraiture, showing individuals with distinctive features and flaws, may reflect Etruscan tomb sculpture traditions showing real people, not idealized types. For over 1,000 years, Etruscans were forgotten. Medieval Italians occasionally discovered tombs, but didn't understand what they'd found. The Renaissance brought recognition that these were traces of pre-Roman civilization. The 18th and 19th centuries birthed Etruscology. Collectors excavated tombs seeking treasures. Museums across Europe acquired Etruscan artifacts. Romantic fascination with vanished civilizations made Etruria fashionable. D.H. Lawrence wrote Etruscan places, romanticizing them as joyful people crushed by militaristic Romans. Modern archaeology became systematic. Great necropolises at Tarquinia and Cerveteri were carefully excavated and documented, now UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Etruscan cities were partially uncovered, revealing urban plans, fortifications, and water systems. But mysteries remain. The Etruscan language is the biggest puzzle. We have thousands of short inscriptions, mostly funerary. A few longer texts exist, including the Liber Linteus, a mummy wrapping with substantial text. We read the letters using their adapted Greek alphabet. We understand basic grammar and know perhaps 300 words. But full translation is impossible because Etruscan isn't related to any known language family. Without a Rosetta Stone equivalent, complete understanding remains impossible. Origins still generate debate. Ancient writers claimed Lydian origins. Modern DNA shows Eastern Mediterranean and Anatolian connections, but substantial mixing with local Italians. Current consensus suggests Etruscan civilization emerged from complex migration and cultural exchange, not simple invasion. New technologies reveal secrets. Ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR detect buried structures. DNA analysis traces population movements. Chemical analysis identifies trade routes. 3D modeling recreates damaged tomb paintings. Recently discovered untouched tombs occasionally yield spectacular finds. Each discovery refines understanding. The Etruscans matter because they remind us history is complex. Before Rome became an empire, it learned from sophisticated, cosmopolitan, innovative neighbors. Etruscans built the foundation Romans claimed as their own.